About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be much fuller if we understood it. And I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'm explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetic is spelled Noetic. Now, over the course of, would you believe, 80 programs, we've learned that, although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: what we are aware of, usually called the conscious mind; what we aren't aware of that keeps our bodies going, and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, the subconscious mind; and what we aren't aware of that connects us with our highest ideals and guides us in our actions, called the superconscious. We then learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift what aspects of mind we're aware of, and so what we're capable of. From neuroscientists, we learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives, from both the body senses and from the mind, to fit past patterns of experience. This is following Begg's principle that neurons that fire together wire together, and they form what's called a default network in the brain, which means that we tend to see, hear, and feel what we expect to or believe we will experience. We also learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active, no one has yet been able to pinpoint how ideas and thoughts are formed in brain tissue. We then saw that many responses in our body happen faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel, and often happen before we are aware of the stimulus, much less the response. And some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. As a result of these various experiments and reports, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is, in fact, the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. Now, this field we call the mind appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and sometimes several feet around the body. And some researchers, as well as teachers of ancient traditions who we call yogis or shamans, say that field looks like a glowing egg shape extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Mind, then, can be understood as a field, a pattern of energy that exists regardless of whether the body is functioning, that permeates and develops with the body and the brain as it is fed information by the senses through the brain. The brain, then, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibrations that is different from every other field. And some experiments have demonstrated that minds can vibrate along similar patterns. They resonate with each other. Their bodies, and the bodies of some of their pets, have been observed to change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way, even though they can't be seen or heard. We've learned also that mind affects energy and matter in a variety of other ways. We've talked about the double-slit experiments in quantum physics, where the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. And for decades now, individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts, which was built upon in the Global Consciousness Project at Princeton, where collective human mind changes the readouts from a set of random number generators on a network of computers. Because of the nature of fields and because of things like the Global Consciousness Project, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field. Jung called it a collective consciousness. More recently, it's been called a global brain. And more scientists are equating mind with the quantum field, that zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arise. And some are calling that the Akashic field, using a Sanskrit term that means the essence of everything that exists in the material world. We've also heard from researchers who are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. With these understandings, we can explore some of the popular ideas about consciousness and have, including the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, accessing information in the quantum or Akashic field through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and consciousness, how music affects the brain and body and our connections with other fields of mind, the role of our state of consciousness in the healing process, how our belief in a treatment can help a patient experience healing, and how we can enhance or slow down healing through thoughts, emotions, and visualizations, how remote viewing and telekinesis work, how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in sync and maximizing our effectiveness, and how the two hemispheres of our brain are involved in this whole process, from the world and in our own minds. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention, as well as the archived shows. In previous months, we talked a bit about the relationship between belief and the body. Bruce Lipton is a pioneer in that field, and in fact his book, The Biology of Belief, has become a very popular way to understand this. Now, Dr. Lipton was a cell biologist. He worked in medical schools, and he was interested in how it was that cells could continue to function even without their nucleus. That didn't fit what was normally thought at the time. And he began to understand that it's the membrane of the cell, not the nucleus, that governs the behavior of the cell. In the process, he began to realize it was the chemical relationships between what was around the cell and what was going on inside the cell that determined how the cell was behaving, which then led him to develop and be part of the development of a field that is now called epigenetics. That is, how the environment affects the behavior and structure of a gene. Now, he's recently begun to talk about the relationship between what's going on in our minds and what's going on in our worlds, and I thought I'd let him share some of his ideas with you.
Whatever, it comes from this mechanism. It's a mechanism. The eyes take in light, but they don't see light back here in the brain. They see energy vibrations. Sound comes in my ears. I don't hear the sound. I hear the vibrations. Taste, that's a vibration. It's a chemical vibration. And all of a sudden, oh my God, this is a transducer. It takes life experiences in a body that gives us vision and smell and taste and touch and pain and love and joy. And I say, and this is sent back to our source. So we came here to have life experiences. And I go, oh my God. Then I missed the reason for being on this planet. I missed the feeling of what is love all about. What are these senses of joy and happiness? I'm not allowed to experience them as a guy because that interferes with a soldier job. I'm wasting my life. And that was a wake-up call. I said, well, damn it, go out and taste it and touch it and feel it and smell it and do whatever you want. And if it's really good, do it again. And if it didn't work out so good, then don't do that one again. You came here to have these experiences. Why would you want to waste your life having all the negative fear, anxiety, all those problems? It was a choice. A choice. It was consciousness. But we didn't know that because we were programmed to be victim. And a victim has no power. And as long as you believe you're a victim, then you manifest victim.
So as often happens when a scientist actually goes deeply into his field for decades, Bruce Lipton has come out the other side and realized that our experience is a function of what we believe, and our belief is a function of what we have been programmed to understand about ourselves and about our world. And as he pointed out, we get to manifest the victim that we were trained to be, if that's the choice that we're making. But he also points out that we can change that.
Reprogram the subconscious mind. And I go, significance. If you would put wishes and desire programs into the subconscious mind, that means that program would be operating 95% of the day. Meaning, whether your conscious mind is in control saying, these are my wishes and desires, or the conscious mind's thinking, then the subconscious mind comes in and says, these are my wishes and desires, then guess what? Then 100% of your life, you're living wishes and desires. And therefore, all of a sudden, then the work has to come back to each of us as individuals. Each of us got programmed. Each of us is manifesting that program. We give up our power in many of the programs. The fine example is, you were sick as a kid, and just like your parents and any other family members, when you were sick, you went to the doctor. And I go, that's a habit. I said, what does it mean? It says, you learn this in the first 7 years, the program. It says, when you're sick, you give up this power and you go to that doctor and you accept the doctor as the power over you. Because when it came to health, it's like, no, you don't do it. The doctor does it. That's the program. I say, so what's the point? You have given up power over the control of your life and have given it to the truths, quote unquote, offered by the doctor.
So here's this medical school instructor who has become awakened to what is really going on in the interaction between the brain and the rest of the body, and is beginning to realize there is something called mind. He refers to the conscious mind and the subconscious mind in different ways than we intend to and use them here. But he's still saying we have the option to reprogram our brain. And the way that we have been trained is to turn over our belief in the healing process to a person called a doctor, rather than to recognize that we can know and can choose how we will be experiencing life in this body and how this body can heal. And that was a huge insight for him, and how wonderful that he's able to share it so clearly.
In Newtonian physics, the conventional ones that most people have learned, atoms are physical particles, like little granules. But in 1925, physicists came to another understanding because they said, so what are those particles made out of you called atoms? And they went inside. And they found there were smaller so-called particles, electrons, protons, and neutrons, but that still wasn't the quest, because what are they made out of? And that's when the world changed. Because when quantum physicists started to say, what is an electron or a proton or a neutron made out of? It's made out of energy, not physical, no substance. An atom is like a nano tornado, a spinning force field. There's an illusion that we are physical entities. You're an energy field. And I go, so what the heck difference does that make? And I go, well, here's the interesting part. Particles, I can separate. Here's a particle, here's a particle. Let's talk about one particle. Energy just mixes all together. I'm sitting in a field of energy right now. So if I'm made out of energy, which I am, does it mean that the edge of my energy stops right here? And the answer is no. In quantum mechanics, I'm an energy field. Wherever I go, I'm like a broadcasting an energy. Wherever you are right now, you're broadcasting energy. And so in a Newtonian world we grew up with, this is separate from this and that's separate from this. And I go, in a quantum mechanical world, nothing is separate.
Nothing is separate. Everything is interconnected. Everything affects everything else. So from focusing on the cells to expand his awareness to include the chemicals affecting the cells, expanding his awareness to realizing that chemicals are effectively the energy signatures of forms that are essentially energy, Dr. Bruce Lipton has come to the realization that it is possible for us to experience ourselves not as isolated individuals. If we allow ourselves to reprogram the brain, that default network in the brain, to be able to realize and recognize the overlapping fields of energy that we are and that we are sharing with every other being in the universe. What a shift and what a powerful contribution Dr. Lipton is making. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me we need to look at a book and what's going on in the world today, or what you, the listeners, are curious about. And our book for today really ought to be one of Bruce Lipton's books, don't you think? Let's go back to his original contribution, The Biology of Belief. Now, the full title is The Biology of Belief, Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter, and Miracles. It was published in 2008 by Hay House, and it's a relatively short book and fairly good, easy read. He had a good editor in putting that together. So looking at the table of contents, the first chapter is Lessons from the Petri Dish, in praise of smart cells and smart students. The second, It's the Environment, Stupid. The third chapter is The Magical Membrane. The fourth, The New Physics, Planting Both Feet Firmly on Thin Air. Then the next chapter is Biology and Belief, then Growth and Protection. He offers a chapter called Conscious Parenting, Parents as Genetic Engineers. Remember, he helped create epigenetics, so the experience of the child is going to affect the genetics of his offspring. And finally, he addresses spirit and science. When Dr. Lipton was putting this together, he had been for some time doing lectures on this shift from seeing the DNA in the nucleus as governing the cell to seeing how the interaction of the cell's membrane with the world around it was actually governing the cell. And the more that he worked with that and the more that he saw people relating to it, he realized that there was even more going on in what are called neurotransmitters, which we've talked about, where when a perception is experienced in the brain, chemicals are sent to the cells respond. He's saying, yeah, and they respond in ways that ultimately can change their genetics, which will change how they respond in the future replications of the cell, and how the offspring of these people may respond. So the Biology of Belief is one of those breakthrough things that's reasonably readable. And as I say, came out in 2008. There was a 10th year anniversary edition in 2018. It's available in all the usual places. The Unleashing the Power of Consciousness, Matter, and Miracles Yes, thank you, Dr. Lipton. You have helped to transform a generation's consciousness by offering a very different model of how we can live and how we actually are living. All right, so that brings us to a news item or a question that you have been asking. And what I've been hearing a lot of in the last week or two has been the question, how is it that I am dealing with symptoms even though I am convinced that I shouldn't have those symptoms, and I'm doing everything I know how to tell my body to make those symptoms go away? And what I have to say to folks who are doing that is, congratulations for understanding that the symptoms are the effects of what you are doing with your mind. That's terrific. But you need to understand there is so much more to the mental activity, to your consciousness, than just what you are thinking. So a huge part of why we experience symptoms that are distressing is that in the past we have had experiences that were distressing, and we have hung on to those experiences in some way or another. We may believe that we have forgiven the people involved. We may believe that we have walked away from it. It is nothing. We may believe any number of things, but the nature of the default network program in the brain is to hang on to any distress, and as we heard a while back, is to actually go into more recounting of that distress that has been experienced in the past whenever there is the potential threat of distress now. And as the brain does that, then it sends the chemicals to the cells. Then the cells start acting in alignment with that distress. What that means is, if we're going to be experiencing what Bruce Lipton called heaven on earth, a purely joyful, wonderful life with all that it has to offer us, then we need to go and literally reprogram the brain so that that default network is not dredging up all that negative stuff, or so that should it do so, we can stop it and shift to another way of being. Some of the work that we did talking about the left front cortex and the right rear cortex is part of that work. Some of the talks that we've had around choosing to see the beauty in a situation instead of whatever our normal thought pattern has been is part of that work also. And if you recall, and if you go back to the archives on the noeticmoments.org website, there is a set of instructions for a process that helps people to dissolve the energy and the tendency to replay past negative experiences instead of the choice for positive experiences. Fundamentally, it comes down to keep the brain focused on what the mind is offering, and the mind is always offering a harmonious, joyful, effortless, energizing state of consciousness. And that's what we're aiming for, isn't it? Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there is a list of the titles and other resources we refer to associated with each show that is recorded and linked on that website. And where you can send me your comments and questions, which I'll do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about noetic sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.